Life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision.
It's a privilege to welcome you onto the airwaves this morning. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm very well, mate. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you too, mate. Now, we've had a listener question come in from Kurt we're going to tackle today. What's the topic we're going to tackle here?
Yeah, so Kurt's question is around the banking system and what we call bank bail-ins. So it's an interesting area. It's come up over the past couple of years, particularly really triggered, I think, by the global financial crisis when, particularly in the US, a lot of banks started going broke. And, of course, a lot of Australians asked, could that happen here? Could banks in Australia go broke? And if so, what would that mean for their deposits? So it's actually a really important question. But to sort of, I guess, address why this would occur. So really, when you ask a question about bank bail-ins and the alternative, which is what we call a bailout, really what we're saying is that the bank is in financial trouble, which happens from time to time. They've lent too much money to some people, or, they've got risky loans on their books, and the bank gets itself into financial strife. And therefore, someone needs to step in to fix the problem. And so the two main options that are sort of bantied about, one is a bailout and the other is a bail-in. And there's a very important distinction between the two and how this, could affect listeners. So in a bank bailout, which is what happened in the US back in the global financial crisis, the bank a couple of banks went under, and so the government stepped in, they put money into the bank, and they became a shareholder in the bank effectively and propped it up. And so that kept the bank alive, meant depositors lost nothing, and the bank obviously recovered over time. So that's a bailout. The other option, and I think why Kurt's asking this, is the other one's a bit more scary. In a bail-in, they essentially, to fix up the bank, they recapitalise it by taking depositors' funds. Okay, now that's very scary to listeners. You think, oh, wow, if one of the big banks went under here, would they take depositors' funds? So that's in the situation that a bank gets into trouble. Now, it's a fairly murky area in the sense no one really knows how it would play out in that kind of scenario, because obviously there's a huge political issue here. The banks, they'd be all calling on the government to help them, bail them out. And the politicians are probably not going to like too much the idea of depositors' funds being taken. So they have to make some very tough decisions as to how they were going to fix it if in the situation that Australian Bank got into trouble. And of course, then the question is, what can they do lawfully? Now, to give people a bit of comfort, in Australia, we have a thing called the Australian Government Guarantee, and that applies to bank deposits up to $250,000 per bank. So in other words, let's say you've got $500,000, you could split it between two banks and you have $250,000 guarantee in each of those banks. So that's one way you can protect yourself. Now, to be fair, that's never been tested that I'm aware of. If an Australian bank went broke, my guess is if it was a small bank, they'd probably let it fail and bail people up to the $250,000. If it was a big bank, which has what we call systemic risk that would affect everybody, then I think they may step in and bail it in. Or bail it out. Very difficult to know exactly how these things will play out. So how should people deal with this? Well, as I say, if you've got less than $250,000, then my personal view is you probably don't need to worry too much. And if you've got above $250,000, you might want to split it up amongst different banks. That way you can protect your capital through taking advantage of the guarantee. The guarantee is only valid up to what the government, of course, is ultimately willing to do. And of course, in a tough economic environment, a massive downturn, it's difficult to know exactly how to play out. So you want to try and also stick to the more conservative banks. And this means you're going to have to do a bit of research here to see which banks are the safest. And that's very difficult to answer on air because, as I say, requires a fair bit of research. But that's what a bank bail-in is, though, where they recapitalise the banks by taking depositors. Now, just in terms of history, this has happened before globally. Happened in 2013 in Cyprus. Their banking system collapsed and they did a bail-in where they took the depositors' funds above €100,000. They took a certain portion of it. So it has happened in the past. I would have thought it'd be very politically non-palatable for the population. So I think a bailout would possibly be the more likely scenario. But as I say, it's difficult to know exactly what would happen in that very distressed scenario.
Well, appreciate your response there, Alex, and thank you, Kurt, for your question. If you've got a question you'd like to ask Alex, phone lines are open on 1-800-316-316. And we've got Alex for about another 10 minutes or so. So if you're going to call, now's the time, 1-800-316-316. Now, I know that with Neil a few weeks ago, you were talking about identity theft. And there's been massive news story in the last few days about the Optus hack, with about 9 or 10 million Aussies have had their data stolen. Is there an impact on our listeners today, mate?
Look, potentially. I mean, at this stage, obviously it's early days, so we're waiting for Optus to really tell us what's happening. In fact, I heard this morning that they've been threatened with, they've got to pay a ransom, so to speak, and otherwise they're going to release 10,000 people per day or something like that, to some effect I heard on the radio earlier today. So it's probably early days yet, but the risks are this. So these are the risks. If someone steals your identity, and so they get, your name, your date of birth, your passport, your driver's license, etc., then what they can do without you knowing is they can apply for credit in your name. So they can apply for a credit card, a personal loan, etc., and take that out. And that makes you potentially liable for those debts. If the bank doesn't pick up on it and they see you as being the person, you're in a risky position here. And this does happen all the time. And so the comment I made when I was chatting with Neil about a few weeks ago is a lot of people don't take action on these things till it's too late. And they kind of think, it's not going to happen to me. We kind of dismiss it. But this Optus one, I think, is a perfect wake-up call for people to now take action to protect themselves. The other thing, obviously, that these hackers can do, if they've got access to your passwords, then they can potentially get into your computer system, into your bank accounts. They can get into things and cause trouble. So it's, the classic mistake people make is obviously they use the same password for every website they access. And these days, you might access, 20, 30, 50 different websites, depending on what you do. And then the last area is that if someone has stolen your identity and they do take out credit in your name, it can muck up your credit score. If you go for a home loan, and obviously most Aussies want to own a home at some point, this can have a very negative effect on your credit score and your ability, therefore, to get a home loan. So you do need to take steps to try and protect your identity from these kinds of things. If you do get attacked, and as I say, with Optus, it's probably early days yet to find out the real impact. Well, I probably won't know that for a couple of months, but certainly it is a big risk for most of us.
Well, it certainly is a massive impact on many people in Australia. What can be done to reduce the risk for those of us who may have Optus accounts?
Yeah. Look, the good news is there's lots of things you can do to protect. My favourite one is one that this is the one that people are probably least aware of, is you can sign up to a credit alert system. So in Australia, we've got, I think, at least 3 major what we call credit reporting bureaus. So when you take out, a mobile phone plan with Optus, or you take out a personal loan or a credit card, that gets reported to these credit reporting agencies because they're the ones that contain all our information on our borrowing history, whether you've got defaults, etc. And those companies have what we call alert systems. So you can pay a small monthly fee, which is what I do for my wife and I. So that way, if someone were to apply for a credit card or any loan at all in our names, they'll inform me straight away. Then I can get on the phone and ring up whatever the company is someone's tried to apply for and say, that's not me. And then they can put a stop to it very quickly. So that's one great thing you can do. Those services are generally very low cost. You got to pay like $4 a month or something like that. And that way you can, be aware if someone has stolen your identity. So that's the first one. The second one is the password issue. Now, as I say, many people just use the same password over and over. Get a service like LastPass, or there's a few other ones, 1Password, things like that, where you essentially can access the websites through your computer with a different password for every website, and it will remember it for you and it pre-populates it. That way you can use, cryptic passwords, and the probability, therefore, of someone accessing, your banking website and things like that drops significantly. You're making it very hard for them. And one that's along the lines of that is what we call two-factor authentication. Usually, it's an app on your phone like Google Authenticator, or they'll send you a text message, and that way, for someone to hack into your systems, not only do they need your password, but they also need your mobile phone as well, which of course is highly improbable that they're going to have both of those. So that's a great way of protecting yourself and protecting from people having unauthorized access to your financial data and banking access. Having antivirus software on your computer can also minimize the risk, because it'll pick up when someone's potentially hacking into it. So that's a really important one to have as well. So they're sort of the IT things you can do. And then at a practical level, I always say to people, when you get your credit card statement, a lot of people just look at the final figure and they say, right, I'll pay that. But actually go through your statement every time and take your whole 2 minutes to go through and look at the transactions and say, does anything look not right here? Is there something wrong with it? Check it properly. And that way you can alert the company, the credit card company or bank, the bank, and say, hey, look, this doesn't look right. What's going on here? So do that sort of thing. And also, and this is the old school way, when you're throwing out documents at home, things that have got, important data on it, make sure you shred those documents before you go putting them out in your garbage. So, because the old way people used to steal identity is to go through people's rubbish. These days, of course, it's mostly IT related. But nonetheless, make sure you shred documents before you go throwing them out in the bin. That way you're reducing your risk. So there's lots of things you can do to significantly reduce it. It's not perfect by any means, but you can do a lot to protect yourself financially from these things and reduce the stress. Because I'll tell you what, this is a big issue for small business. The stress that comes in if your systems get hacked is massive.
Yeah, very good advice there, mate, and certainly a big story to watch, what's happening with Optus there. Now, last week I know you spoke with Neil about the stock markets, and there's been quite a lot of movement on the stock market recently. What's the latest advice you've got for those who are looking at the stock markets at the moment?
Yeah, so look, since last week I said to Neil, we called it "Is Chaos Coming?" There's a lot of storms around the world at the moment brewing, and since then markets have fallen probably about 5% or more, the stock markets around the world. And so the question really sort of should be, is there something that people need to do? And so what I say here is, look, always ask yourself, why am I investing? Am I investing for the short term or am I investing for the long term? So for most of us, our super is something we generally can't touch until we're 65 or more as a general rule. And so you can buy good quality assets and forget about it and let time take care of itself. On the other hand, if your time frame is short, so like a common one out, people say to me, Alex, I want to buy a house in 2 years' time, and my message is always the same, keep your money in cash, because you can't be guaranteed that in 2 years' time, the stock markets are going to be higher than when they are today. They might be lower. So you've got to have your time frame should be the big driver. Stock market's falling 5%, whoopee-doo. At the end of the day, it's not really a big deal. If you're buying good quality assets, companies are going to be around, rain, hail or shine. I don't think Woolies is going to go bust anytime soon, for example. All those sort of, if you have that sort of long-term perspective, you shouldn't be concerned at all. Go back to doing what God has called you to do and not worry about your money. But as I say, your time frame will have a big impact on what you do. But I call this the sleep at night test. So I talk to clients about this sort of thing. I say, look, how will you sleep knowing where your money's invested? Do you understand where it's invested? Do you understand the ups and downs, what the risks are of any particular investment you have? Make sure you understand what you're investing in. And that's part of good Christian stewardship. We don't just put our money into anything. We make sure we understand what that investment is, what its risks are, and what the potential outcomes are. And we do that before we invest any money. That's good stewardship. So, that's some sort of simple things to think about, in terms of, how you address the current situation.
And, I guess as Christians, mate, we've always got to come back to, Jehovah Jireh, our provider. We just got to trust in the Lord, don't we, hey?
100%. I mean, to me, at the end of the day, the money we have, it's really God's money. We say, I take the view that God blesses us with all different amounts. Some of us have a little, some have a lot, but we all have that same responsibility to look after it as though it is God's money. and that we want to do good things with it. Money is purposeful, and we want to do well and do good with it. But the other thing, and I think this is the good thing, when we hear these challenging times and, unfortunately, fear creeps in, it's a great reminder for Christians to hold money loosely. We shouldn't be holding on tight. We should be thinking to ourselves, okay, if tough times come, who can we help? Who can we support? What ministries, are suffering? What can we do to help others during these times? Because that kind of mentality is one where we, as you say, Jehovah Jireh, he's going to provide for us. And so we want to sow in and help other people at this time. So I think that the challenge when times get tough is we become our inner human, if you like, our inner man starts to withhold, when in fact, as we need to step out in faith and say, what are we going to sow into? Who are we going to help? Who are we going to bless when tough times come? Because that's a massive opportunity for the gospel, to show joy in tough times. And, we have an awesome God who can provide. God is supernatural. He's above and beyond our circumstances. God's not worried about stock markets falling or anything like that. If we take sensible steps, we be practical and sensible with our money, we act as good stewards, and then we live generously, we're going to be fine.
Absolutely. Well, it's always good to get some good advice for you each week here on Vision. And once again, if people want to find out more about Wealth with Purpose, they can search up the website wealthwithpurpose.com. There's free ebooks, there's a toolkit, there's free videos and podcast content. They're also on social media as well. Alex Cook, it's always a privilege catching up with you, mate. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.